You ever wonder how that happens? You search for a new pair of shoes online, and then suddenly ads for those exact shoes are following you everywhere? Well, that's data engineering in action. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this really powerful field. We're going to take you from a super simple concept, a digital folder, all the way up to the massive systems that run the biggest companies in the world. Let's get into it. So here's the plan. We'll kick things off with the big problem, this absolute flood of data. Then we'll meet the people who actually manage it. After that, we'll walk through a really simple, practical example, then see how that scales up to the enterprise level. We'll even look at a real-world expert's career and wrap up by asking, what's next for this field? To really get what data engineering is all about, you first have to understand the ridiculous scale of the data we're creating. I mean, every single day. It's an amount that's almost impossible to imagine, and it's just growing faster and faster, which, as you can guess, creates a huge challenge for basically everyone. Get this. By 2025, it's predicted the world will generate about 181 zettabytes of data. And to put that into perspective, just 1 zettabyte is a trillion gigabytes. It's a number so big it almost doesn't mean anything, right? But that is the raw material that data engineers work with every single day. But okay, that huge number is pretty abstract. So let's bring it down to something we can all relate to. This quote here from our source material just nails it. Every single time you search for something, you click a link, you scroll through a feed, you are generating data. And that data gets collected, processed, and used to figure out what ads to show you. That whole invisible process, yep, that's data engineering. So if we're all just out here creating this giant ocean of data, who are the people building the systems, the dams, the pipelines, the treatment plants, to actually make it useful? Well, you can think of them as the digital architects of our time. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine a big, busy bakery. A data engineer isn't the person who bakes the cake you see in the window. No, they're the master organizer in the back. They make sure all the ingredients, the flour, the sugar, the eggs, are sourced correctly, are clean, are perfectly organized, and are ready to go for the bakers. They build the whole foundation that makes the baking possible. And we can actually take that analogy a step further. So if the data engineer is the construction crew putting up the physical house, the data scientist is the architect. They're the ones who design the blueprint and figure out what's even possible with the structure. And then you've got the data analyst. They're like the interior decorator. They take everything that's been built and make it beautiful and easy to understand for the people who are actually going to live in the house. In this case, the business leaders making decisions. Now, a really important process for that construction crew is something called ETL. It stands for extract, transform, and load. And if we stick with our bakery, it's basically all the prep work. You extract the eggs from the carton, you transform them by cracking them open, and then you load them into the mixing bowl. It's just how raw, messy data gets prepped and ready to be used. Okay, so all this talk about architects and bakeries can feel a little up in the air. So let's make it super concrete. Let's look at one of the most basic building blocks in all of data engineering, just a simple storage folder up in the cloud. One of the most common tools for this is Amazon S3. And honestly, the name says it all, simple storage service. The absolute easiest way to think about this is like having a personal hard drive that's pretty much unlimited in size, but it lives on the internet, so you can get to it from anywhere. And what's wild is that creating one of these things, they're called S3 buckets, is incredibly easy. But look, the clicks themselves aren't the important part. It's the concept. With just a tiny bit of effort, you can have a secure, massively scalable place to store your data. It's basically the digital version of an empty filing cabinet that just happens to be infinitely large. All right, so a single folder, that's great for your personal files, maybe a small project. But how do you go from that to handling the insane data needs of a huge global company? And this right here is the crucial jump. What happens when it's not just a few photos you're storing? What if it's millions of customer transactions every hour, complex supply chain data, marketing info from a dozen different places, and it all needs to be analyzed like right now? Well, that's where a system like an enterprise data warehouse comes in. This diagram shows a flow that uses a tool called Amazon Redshift. So first, data gets pulled in from all these different sources and dropped into a storage layer like S3. Hey, that's our cloud folder. Then an ETL process cleans it all up and loads the nice finished data into Redshift, which is an engine that's built specifically for super fast analysis. So why on earth would anyone build this complex fortress of data? Because it powers the absolute core of a modern business. This is what feeds the dashboards that executives look at to make multi-million-dollar decisions. It's what allows for really deep, complex reporting. And it provides the clean, organized data you have to train powerful machine learning models. It's really the engine room of any data-driven company. So we've seen the problem, we've talked about the concepts, we've looked at the tech, but who are the actual people that build and manage these incredibly complex systems? Let's look at the blueprint of a real-world expert. This is Mohammed Subtain, and we're going to look at his profile because it's a perfect illustration of the skills and the career path of a data engineer who works on exactly these kinds of huge enterprise-scale systems. So look at this. In just a few years, he went from being a data analyst, our interior decorator, to a data engineer, and then to a senior data engineer. This just shows you what a clear and frankly rapid career path is possible in a field that is in unbelievably high demand right now. And his toolkit? It perfectly connects all the dots for us. He uses something called Azure Data Lake. That's basically the enterprise version of our simple little S3 bucket. He uses Azure Data Factory to do the ETL work. He enables tools like Power BI for the data analysts. And he builds it all using the two foundational languages of data, Python and SQL. See, this isn't just a random list of skills. It's a complete end-to-end system, all represented in one person's expertise. So all of this brings us to a really critical question. With technology moving so fast, especially with the explosion of AI, what does the future of a job like this even look like? This is the question on everybody's mind, right? You've got AI that can write code and automate all sorts of tasks. So is the role of the data engineer in trouble? Well, the answer, according to our sources, is a pretty clear no. The future isn't about replacement, it's about collaboration. Think of AI as becoming this incredibly powerful tool, kind of like a co-pilot that can automate the repetitive, boring stuff, like writing basic code or optimizing a simple process. But that doesn't get rid of the engineer, it actually elevates them. It frees them up to focus on the really hard problems, designing the overall architecture, making sure the data quality is perfect, and translating complex business goals into a technical strategy. The role just evolves, from a builder to more of an architect and a strategist. So from a simple search for shoes all the way to the complex architecture of a global company, data engineering is really the art and the science of making data speak. It's about building the systems that let us all listen to the stories that data has to tell. And the only question that's left is, what story will you build?